Rejection is one of the most universal human experiences. Every person, regardless of culture, intelligence, success, or social status, will encounter rejection at some point in life. Someone may reject your ideas, your efforts, your love, your ambitions, or even your identity. For many people, rejection feels deeply personal. It can feel like a judgment on your worth, your competence, or your place in the world. But from a psychological perspective, rejection is far more complex than it appears on the surface. It is not simply a negative experience. In fact, when understood correctly, rejection can become one of the most powerful forces for personal growth, emotional intelligence, and psychological strength. Human beings are biologically wired to fear rejection. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on belonging to a group. Being rejected by a tribe could mean losing protection, resources, and ultimately life itself. Because of this evolutionary pressure, the human brain developed strong emotional responses to social exclusion. Modern neuroscience has shown that the same brain regions that process physical pain also become active when we experience social rejection. This is why rejection does not just feel disappointing. It can feel physically painful. However, the same brain that fears rejection also has the capacity to reinterpret it. This is where the philosophy often associated with thinkers like Marcus Aurelius becomes psychologically powerful. Instead of seeing rejection as proof of personal failure, the mind can learn to view it as information, feedback, or even opportunity. This shift in interpretation changes the emotional outcome dramatically. When rejection is interpreted as a threat, it produces shame, anxiety, anger, and withdrawal. But when rejection is interpreted as a challenge or a lesson, it produces motivation, clarity, and resilience. The idea of using rejection to your favor is deeply connected to what modern psychologists call cognitive reframing. Cognitive reframing is the process of consciously changing the way we interpret an event. The event itself does not change, but our understanding of it does. Marcus Aurelius often emphasized that external events are neutral. It is our judgment about them that determines whether they harm us. In psychological terms, this means that rejection itself is not inherently destructive. It becomes destructive only when our interpretation turns it into evidence of inadequacy or humiliation. When people experience rejection, their behavior often reveals much about their inner psychological state. For example, some individuals immediately withdraw, they stop trying, they avoid similar situations in the future, and they build emotional walls. This behavior often indicates that the person's self-esteem is strongly tied to external validation. If their sense of worth depends on approval from others, then rejection threatens their entire identity. Their mind tries to protect itself by avoiding situations where rejection could happen again. Other individuals respond differently. Instead of withdrawing, they become curious. They analyze what happened. They look for patterns. They ask whether the rejection was about timing, compatibility, circumstances, or genuine areas for improvement. This behavior usually indicates a growth-oriented mindset. These individuals tend to separate their identity from the outcome. They see rejection as feedback rather than condemnation. Body language can also reveal how someone internally processes rejection. A person who internalizes rejection often displays closed body posture. Their shoulders may slump, eye contact decreases, and their tone becomes quieter or defensive. These subtle physical signals reflect the brain's attempt to protect itself by reducing visibility and vulnerability. The nervous system shifts into a mild defensive state. On the other hand, individuals who process rejection constructively often maintain more stable body language. They may pause, reflect, and respond calmly. Their posture remains upright, their breathing steady, and their tone measured. This does not mean they feel no disappointment. It simply means their emotional regulation systems are active. Of reacting impulsively, they are allowing the rational parts of the brain to interpret the situation. Interestingly, psychologists often pay attention not only to how people react to rejection, but also to how they behave when rejection does not occur. For example, a person who constantly seeks approval even when they are accepted may reveal a deep fear of future rejection. They may over-explain themselves, constantly ask for reassurance, or avoid expressing disagreement. This behavior suggests that the person anticipates rejection even when there is no immediate threat. Their mind has learned to expect exclusion, often due to earlier experiences in childhood or past relationships. In contrast, individuals who do not show excessive concern about rejection usually have a stronger internal sense of identity. They are more comfortable expressing opinions, taking risks, and pursuing opportunities without needing constant validation. This psychological independence does not mean they ignore rejection. Rather, it means rejection does not define their self-concept. One of the most powerful psychological lessons about rejection is understanding that rejection often reveals more about the other person than it does about you. Humans make decisions based on countless internal factors: personal preferences, emotional states, past experiences, insecurities, social pressures, and timing. When someone rejects an idea, an opportunity, or a relationship, they are often responding to their own internal landscape rather than objectively evaluating your worth. For example, job rejection might not reflect a lack of competence. It might reflect organizational politics, budget constraints, or a hiring manager's subjective preferences. A romantic rejection might not mean you are unattractive or unworthy. It might mean the other person is emotionally unavailable, pursuing someone else, or simply incompatible with you. When individuals understand this complexity, rejection becomes less personal and more informational. At the behavioral level, people who master the psychology of rejection tend to develop a form of emotional detachment. This detachment is not coldness or indifference. Instead, it is the ability to observe and experience without immediately attaching self-judgment to it. This mental skill allows individuals to remain open to opportunities without becoming emotionally destroyed by setbacks in daily life. Rejection appears in many subtle forms. Someone might ignore a message. A colleague might dismiss an idea during a meeting. A friend might cancel plans repeatedly. These small experiences accumulate in the mind and can shape a person's beliefs about themselves. If someone interprets these events as evidence that they are unimportant or unwanted, their behavior begins to change. They may stop initiating conversations, hesitate to share ideas, or isolate themselves socially. Conversely, if someone interprets these same events as normal fluctuations in human interaction, their behavior remains flexible. They continue communicating, expressing ideas, and maintaining relationships without excessive fear. The difference lies not in the events themselves, but in the meaning the mind assigns to them. Reverse psychology plays an interesting role in how rejection can be used to one's advantage. Reverse psychology is essentially the strategic use of human resistance. People often resist being controlled or pressured. When someone feels that their freedom of choice is threatened, they may instinctively move in the opposite direction to restore their sense of autonomy. This phenomenon is known in psychology as reaction. When someone understands this principle, they begin to recognize that rejection can sometimes increase value or attraction. Scarcity and perceived independence often create psychological interest. For instance, when someone appears overly eager for approval, others may unconsciously perceive them as less valuable or less confident. But when someone demonstrates self-respect and independence, even in the face of rejection, their perceived value often increases. This dynamic can be seen in many social situations. Imagine two individuals presenting ideas in a meeting. One person desperately tries to convince everyone that their idea is correct. They seek validation from every participant and become visibly anxious when questioned. The other person presents their idea confidently, but remains calm even if others disagree. Ironically, the second person's calm acceptance of potential rejection often makes their idea appear more credible and attractive. The psychology behind this reaction is related to confidence signals. Humans constantly interpret subtle signals to assess the confidence and status of others. When someone handles rejection calmly, it signals emotional stability and self-trust. These traits are often associated with competence and leadership. However, the psychological journey of learning to use rejection constructively is not always easy. Many people carry deep emotional wounds from past rejections. Childhood experiences, bullying, family criticism, or failed relationships can create strong emotional memories. These memories shape how the brain predicts future social experiences. If the brain has learned that rejection leads to humiliation or abandonment, it will try to avoid situations where rejection might occur. This avoidance can have long-term consequences. People may avoid pursuing careers they truly want, expressing their authentic personality or forming deep relationships. Over time, this creates a life that feels safe but unfulfilled. The person may experience chronic dissatisfaction without fully understanding why. Psychologists often analyze these patterns by observing behavioral avoidance, emotional triggers, and internal narratives. For example, when a person repeatedly says things like, "I probably won't succeed anyway," or "they wouldn't be interested in someone like me," these statements reveal internal belief systems shaped by past rejection. These beliefs operate automatically and influence decision-making without conscious awareness. Another important area psychologists examine is emotional regulation. When individuals experience rejection, their immediate emotional reaction can reveal how well their nervous system handles stress. Some people react with anger, blaming others for the outcome. Others react with shame, blaming themselves excessively. Both reactions can distort the ability to learn from the experience. Healthy emotional regulation involves acknowledging the disappointment without exaggerating its meaning. The individual allows the emotion to pass, reflects on the situation, and extracts useful information. This process strengthens resilience over time. Rejection can also influence relationships in powerful ways. People who fear rejection often develop people-pleasing behaviors. They may constantly sacrifice their own needs to maintain approval from others. While this strategy may temporarily reduce conflict, it often leads to resentment and emotionally exhaustion. Relationships built on fear of rejection rarely feel authentic. On the other hand, individuals who are comfortable with the possibility of rejection tend to form healthier relationships. They communicate boundaries clearly, express honest opinions, and accept that not everyone will agree with them. This authenticity attracts people who genuinely appreciate them rather than people who simply tolerate them in the long term. The way a person handles rejection strongly influences their mental well-being. Chronic fear of rejection is associated with anxiety disorders, social withdrawal, and low self-esteem. When individuals believe that rejection defines their worth, they live in a constant state of psychological vulnerability. But when individuals learn to reinterpret rejection as feedback rather than condemnation, their mental landscape changes dramatically, become more willing to take risks, explore opportunities, and engage with the world. Each rejection becomes data rather than damage. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the idea that obstacles can become the path itself. Modern psychology echoes this principle. When a person encounters rejection and chooses to analyze it rather than avoid it, they gain valuable information about their skills, environment, and social dynamics. Over time, this information accumulates into wisdom. Psychologists also recognize that rejection can stimulate personal development in unexpected ways. Many successful individuals report that early rejections forced them to refine their ideas, prove their skills, or pursue alternative paths that ultimately suited them better. In this sense, rejection acts as a filtering process that guides individuals toward more compatible opportunities at the neurological level. Repeated exposure to manageable rejection can actually strengthen emotional resilience. The brain learns that rejection is uncomfortable but not catastrophic. This learning reduces the intensity of future emotional reactions. The individual becomes more psychologically flexible. However, it is important to acknowledge that not all rejection is harmless. Severe or repeated rejection, especially during childhood, can have lasting psychological effects. Children who grow up feeling consistently rejected by caregivers may develop attachment insecurities. These insecurities can influence adult relationships. It's creating patterns of fear, jealousy, or emotional distance. Because of this, psychologists emphasize the importance of self-awareness. Understanding one's personal history with rejection allows individuals to distinguish between past emotional wounds and present reality. Sometimes the pain felt in a current rejection is amplified by unresolved memories from earlier experiences. The process of transforming rejection into strength, therefore, involves both philosophical insight and emotional healing. It requires individuals to examine their beliefs about worth, success, and belonging. It requires developing the ability to observe emotions without becoming controlled by them. It requires accepting that rejection is not a rare event, but a natural part of human interaction. When individuals adopt this mindset, rejection loses much of its power to intimidate. It becomes a normal part of exploration. Just as scientists conduct experiments that may fail before discovering something valuable, individuals who pursue meaningful goals must be willing to encounter rejection repeatedly. The paradox is that those who are least afraid of rejection often achieve the most success. Their willingness to try, fail, learn, and try again creates opportunities that others never experience. Each rejection becomes a step forward rather than a barrier. In the end, the psychology of rejection teaches a profound lesson about human freedom. While we cannot control whether others accept or reject us, we have remarkable control over how we interpret those experiences. Our interpretation determines whether rejection becomes a source of suffering or a catalyst for growth. When people learn to see rejection through this deeper psychological lens, something remarkable happens. Their confidence no longer depends entirely on external approval. Their motivation becomes internally driven. Their relationships become more authentic. Their decisions become guided by curiosity rather than fear. Rejection then transforms from a painful obstacle into one of life's most powerful teachers. It stops being a verdict about who you are and starts becoming information about where you are going. And once a person truly understands this, rejection no longer closes doors. In many cases, it becomes the force that pushes those doors open.